I have to tell you about something to help you out. The world's largest offshore event taking place entirely online. You hear that? Online. From October 7th through 11th. It's going to be put on by our friend Mikkel Thorop, host of the Expat Money Show, the highly sought after expat consultant with over 2 decades of experience. In this offshore event online, like we said, you will discover why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. You will learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect plan B. We all should have that. Maybe plan C, plan D, and so on. How to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. And these are the actual real experts, not the trust the experts kind that we've been promised to trust. Headline speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, friend of the show Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo. A lot of those names have been on this show, so you guys are going to want to tune into this online, like we said, October 7th through 11th. To reserve your complimentary ticket, head over to expatmoneysummit.com. That is expatmoneysummit.com. Let's get back to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. And let's see, I should look at my calendar. I think by the time this airs, I'm back in the USA, hopefully, after a trip to Mount Athos. Again, just so you understand, I did not want any pauses or breaks. I did not want the episodic nature of this show to lapse while I was gone with Father Peter Heers over in Mount Athos. So I recorded this on August 21st. Let's hope that nothing crazy has happened since then. Let's hope that we're all still alive. How about that? I've got Scott Horton, the foreign policy guru, on the show. I said this at the closing of the last episode, and I'm not bloviating. This is not hyperbole. He knows anything and everything about foreign policy. When I have questions about what the heck is going on, he's my go-to, for real. And I mean that. We're going to talk about what in the world is going on with Ukraine and Russia. I kept hearing that, oh my God, Vladimir Putin's just evil. He invaded another sovereign country. Zelensky's a hero. He's a patriot, right? I see these Ukrainian flags in certain yards around town. I see them on profiles. Well, I did. What happened to those? Where are you guys? I thought you loved Ukraine. Aren't they the good guys? Isn't Zelensky a patriot? Why'd they shut down the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that'd been there for over 1,000 years? Isn't it a democracy? Anyway, I'm getting off on my own passionate rants. Scott Horton is here to talk to us about what in the world is going on. And like I said, by the time this airs, I hope we're all alive and safe and World War III has not broken out. Scott Horton, welcome back to the show, sir. It's been a long time. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Buck?
I'm great. I'm about to, as this drops, I will be I think I'll still be in Greece. But as we record, I'm about to head there. And who knows the way things work. By the time this drops, current events could be not so current anymore as far as what we're going to talk about. But give the folks an intro really quick, and then we're going to jump into Russia, Ukraine, the book you've got coming out, and you're an expert on this topic. So give them a quick intro, and we'll get into it.
Intro about what? About me?
Who you are. Who the heck is Scott Horton?
Oh, well, I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, and we're just wrapping up our fund drive right now for all you Bitcoin millionaires out there. We accept your digital donations, and you can write it off on your taxes. And I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com. And I wrote a few books, and I do a podcast, which is foreign policy mostly. I've done 6,000 interviews since 2003. And I'm just an anti-government, Ron Paul type, basically.
Yes. So am I. And what is this book about that you got coming out? What's it called? When will it be available? And that sort of thing.
Okay, well, the title is Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. And when it's going to come out, I don't know. But I'm hard at work editing it. And my buddy Will Porter from the Institute is also helping me edit it right now. And we're just trying to get it down to a reasonable length. And coming up with every cheat we can to get it. We're at least below. I had it up to 1,400 pages, Buck.
I believe this.
So now it's a war to get it down to, and we're below the threshold for being printable, which is like 825 pages. So we're below that now. We're at like high 700s, which is like, really 350 pages worth of notes alone. So it's not quite as bad as it sounds. But anyway, it'll be about a 500-600 page book when it's done. And then when I hope in time for Santa Claus, but I don't really think so. So maybe early next year or something.
You said provoked. Wait a second. Are you saying that the United States government had something to do? I've been told that Putin invaded Ukraine and that he's some sort of tyrant, terrorist type. What did we have to do with this?
Yeah. Well,
I know that's a largely open-ended question for you, but
sure. Well, I like tackling stuff like that. Pardon me. So he is kind of a tyrant terrorist type. He's a strong man. He's a bit of an autocrat. Compared to the propaganda about him, he's essentially, I don't want to say I guess like a center-right conservative. He's not really a nationalist. He's certainly not an ethnic nationalist. He is really like a Republican, is what he is. Maybe an 80s Republican. But he's one who's been in power for 20 years and doesn't seem to think that the ship of state can run without him helming it. And you know how guys like that are. So like, there's no point in downplaying that as far as that goes. Like, he is what he is. But really his existence as president is in part a reaction and part of a direct result of American intervention in Russian politics in the first place back in the 1990s. And then as far as the war in Ukraine, yes, Joe Biden specifically provoked it. We can go back, and the book does. The reason it was 1,400 pages is because I go back to H.W. Bush, and I blame him for starting the new Cold War as soon as the old one was over. And damn him for that. And Bill Clinton and W. Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump all played their parts all the way through. But when it comes down to it, Putin essentially, his red lines were really crossed in the spring of 21 in Biden's first year. And he was playing hardball. And instead of doing the right thing and backing down from positions that America really shouldn't have taken in the first place and saying, okay, buddy, you got a point. All right, we can compromise about this or that. Instead, he just played hardball back and said, no, America's the tough guy and we win and you lose and you have to do it our way. And that's it. And really, I thought the war wouldn't happen basically mostly because Burns, who is his CIA director and really his top diplomat, or at least an equal peer diplomat compared to Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, he used to be ambassador to Russia and, was a Russia guy, in the State Department. He's not a spy. He was a State Department Foreign Service officer, career guy. And he was the one who warned Condoleezza Rice back during the W. Bush years to not invite Ukraine into NATO in the first place. I'm not saying he's a great guy, but he is a wise man compared to these other people, at least, And I thought he would see Biden through this. I thought that would be his mandate from Biden would be, Burns, help me stop this war, right? Like, what were we going to do? But that was wrong. In fact, I think now I'm convinced that the Biden government really wanted the war, or at least that was their number 2 choice, and only by a hair. It was almost tied with their first choice. So what they would do in,
what was the first choice?
So their first choice was to threaten Putin. You better not do it or else, right? But then their other choice was what they call the Afghan model, which we see them play over and over again in Bosnia and in Chechnya and Syria, that they support the terrorists. September 11th and Iraq War II, where our guys fought the Sunni-based insurgency, which the worst part of it was Al-Qaeda in Iraq. All that notwithstanding, they're right back to the Reaganite and George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton policy of backing these guys. And, it's a very cynical empire, the empire. But anyway, so I had thought that Burns would see him through it. And really, Putin's demands were very simple. His demands were that, and by the way, this is with, on the Afghan model thing there. This is with the Ukrainians fighting in the role of the Mujahideen, but also with the Mujahideen, literally ISIS terrorists from the Syria war and Chechens who'd gone to Syria to fight. They've now come and, not just now, but really in the past decade, have come to Ukraine to fight on the side of the Ukrainian nationalists against the Russians, and even more so since 2022, which sounds crazy, but it's completely true. So anyway, the major issues, Buck, were the threat of America truly incorporating Ukraine into NATO, which, as Putin said completely rationally, this, you could say, oh, it's a cynical excuse or whatever, but gee, his talking point writer makes a lot of sense when he said, listen, Ukraine doesn't recognize Russian ownership of Crimea, which they took back in 2014. He says, if you bring Ukraine into NATO and they say we're occupying their territory, then that could lead directly to war between NATO and Russia and nuclear war and the end of the world over goddamn Crimea. And you can't want that, right? And, there was a press conference where this French reporter is after him and he's like yelling that at her. Do you not understand the implications of this? If you bring Ukraine into your military alliance while we have an ongoing border dispute, in a couple of places, but particularly on the issue of the Crimean Peninsula there. And the other thing was that starting with W. Bush, America had broken Clinton's promise not to move military equipment into the new NATO states as they're expanding NATO eastward. And one of the things that W. Bush did was he tore up the anti-ballistic missile treaty and he started putting anti-missile launchers in Romania and Poland and radars in the Czech Republic. And this is a little bit complicated, but the basic deal is, the story was we're just trying to protect Europe from Iranian nuclear missiles. Well, Iran doesn't have missiles that can reach Poland or anywhere else in Europe, really, or even Southern Europe. And they don't have nuclear weapons anyway. And the whole thing was a red herring.
Well, they've been a week away from having nukes since we're at the same age, since we were in our teen years.
That's right. Literally, Netanyahu debuted this lie in 1995 when I was a senior in high school.
Same, right? Yes.
Dude, word up. Yeah. Seriously. That's not hyperbole. That's really, it was hyperbole, but this ain't hyperbole about that hyperbole.
Once a month, my supporters of this show and myself and a special guest have a Zoom meeting. It's not recorded. It's not posted. It's just private. It's between you guys, the guest, and myself. I do this because it means a lot for you guys who support me by showing me that this show means a lot to you. I love talking with you. I look at it as like a benefit for people that support the show, but it's really a benefit for me. I get to know you guys and have an off-the-record discussion with our guest. And, sometimes topics you don't want to necessarily have all the ins and outs discussed online, if you know what I mean. So to be in this group, please go to patreon.com/counterflow and donate $5 or more per month. And it gets you in this club. We do it once a month. It's a great time. It's great people. They're all smarter than me. So that's an upgrade from what you're used to. I can tell you that. The guests are always guests that people want to hear from. A lot of you guys will be familiar with many of the guests. Father Turbo's done it. Father Deacon Ananias has done it. David Patrick Carey's done it. My own priest, Father Ignatius, has done it. Father Moses McPherson's done it. It's a very good time, and I think you guys would enjoy it. If you love this content, please go to patreon.com/counterflow, $5 or more per month. Thank you.
But so that left the question, well, then what the hell are you doing with these things? And W. Bush told Putin, look, man, this isn't enough to shoot down an incoming salvo of Russian nukes. You guys got thousands, right? So it can't be that, so don't worry about it. And Putin said, okay, that makes sense, kind of. But so it's not just an ability to shoot down Russian second strike nukes, then maybe it's because you fire your Sparrow, pardon me, I bit my tongue here, fire your Sparrow anti-missile missiles out of the same missile launchers, the Mark 41 missile launchers that can be used to hold Tomahawk cruise missiles, which can be tipped with hydrogen bombs. So this was already a violation of the spirit of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And Colonel McGregor says he recommended since 2004 that, look, if you guys are going to do this, then at least make a handshake deal and invite the Russians in that they can inspect the launchers and make sure that you're not putting Tomahawks in them. I mean, it's a simple reassurance. Why would you not do that? And they refused to do that the whole time. And Putin is saying, look, you're going to bring, since W. Bush had been talking about bringing Ukraine into NATO, Biden was doubling and tripling down on that in his first year in power. And he's saying, I think once you bring them into NATO, you're going to put these same missile launchers in Kharkiv, which would be a 10-minute flight time to Moscow. And so, no, like I'm drawing a line here. Now, as I show in my book, this has been an issue, Buck, on the table from the people making the decisions in the State Department and the National Security Council, the highest levels of power. They have known what an absolutely crucial issue Ukraine is. Like, F Serbia and even Georgia, which Georgia's a really big deal. But Ukraine, it'd be like if the United States lost Texas. And then other countries are coming and trying to take Texas out of the United States of America, what's left of America's sphere of influence, right? They would go crazy. They would go to nuclear war, right? That's what it is. It's, we often make the analogy about Canada. Mm-hmm. What if the Russians came and overthrew the government of Canada twice in 10 years because the people kept voting wrong? So they overthrew the government twice to get people to invite them in. And then they started coming in and training up their military, promising to bring them into the Warsaw Pact and threatening to kick us out of our naval bases in Alaska. Right, we would invade Canada and probably nuke Moscow. That'd be World War III right there. And by the way, when I say that, it sounds completely stupid, doesn't it? They would never try it in a million years. It sounds, It's a completely comic book thing when you put the shoe on the other foot. But that's exactly what we're doing here. But in fact, it's even worse because Ukraine and Russia have been joined together like Texas, which was once independent and could be again. This is a topic we've discussed before, right?
Yes.
They were joined for 300 years and now have been split apart again. So Texas has been part of the United States for about 200 almost, not quite, right? Mm-hmm. 190. So, this is the most crucial issue to them. And there's a huge number of ethnic Russians that live in the east of the country. And so you can find the wise men in the pages of Foreign Affairs talking about how, boy, we better treat this delicately. Every year since you and I were in high school, okay, they've talked about this the whole time. Wow, we better figure out exactly how we're going to handle this. And that includes the good guys and the bad guys and all the experts who decided either way on this. You find Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger going, we got to crush and take over the world, but like not Ukraine, though. I mean, that would be obviously a bridge too far. You know, the H.W. Bush government, they knew they were going to expand NATO into Eastern Europe, but they wanted Ukraine to stay part of the USSR. Not only did they not plan on bringing Ukraine into NATO, they wanted Russia to keep them because they didn't want the trouble, which is insane and shameful on the part of the Bushes that they would try, that Bush Sr. and his men, that they would try to preserve the Russian control, or the Soviet, literally Soviet control over Belarus, Ukraine, and the stands in Central Asia, but they did. And anyway, the point just being that Bush Sr. would have thought you were cuckoo bananas if you were going to bring Ukraine into NATO. Yeltsin almost invaded Ukraine back, at the very dawn of the new Russian Federation because of a dispute over Crimea and over control of the Donbass. And, these are areas that the communists, they were really parts of Russia that the communists gave to Ukraine in the 1920s and then in the 1950s with Crimea. And so, hot as hell border dispute, really bad place to start mucking around, promising to bring a country into your military alliance. And if you ask the Biden people, and I swear, this may be a place where I can edit the book, but it's sort of in here like this on purpose. It just comes up over and over and over again. That, let me tell you something. We will never bring Ukraine into NATO. What are you, crazy? They're so corrupt. Their democracy ain't a democracy in nothing but parchment. I mean, it is the most corrupt kind of government. And in business, that ain't free market capitalism. It's the most corrupt kind of capitalism. And they have this ongoing border dispute with Russia. And it has to be unanimous to bring a new country into NATO. And Germany and France absolutely will not stand for it. Mm-hmm. And so Biden himself said over and over, oh my God, over and over and over. And his entire stupid cabinet, Sullivan and Blinken and all of them, don't be stupid, Buck. We're not bringing Ukraine into NATO. Don't worry about that, Putin. We're not bringing, what are we crazy? We can't do that. By the way, though, no one can tell us what countries we can't bring into NATO. We have an open door, and we'll be goddamned if we're going to let Russia tell us that we can't bring Ukraine into NATO. So Ukraine, sure, you can come into NATO someday. And that was their position that they refused to back down from. Now, this open door, of course, is make-believe, right? It's just a term that someone invented in 1999. It doesn't mean anything. It's just jargon from international treatyists, right? It doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, again, even the worst hawks on NATO expansion the whole time, like Kissinger or Brzezinski, the Rockefellers, two worst imperialists, said, yeah, we really should come up with a Finland model, an Austria model, a neutral, independent model for Ukraine, where neither side's trying to take them. That way, the other side doesn't freak out that the other side's trying to take them, right? Again, this has been not in the public, but at least in the pages of Foreign Affairs, this has been an issue all along. There have been, again, even hawks who have said all along that we should find out a way to come to a permanent compromise that both sides can accept before this comes to a war. And then what they do, and go full speed right into a goddamn war anyway. And an absolutely horrific one where, at the very least, a couple 100,000 people have been killed. High hundreds of thousands have been maimed and just horribly injured. The entire east of the country's been decimated. And it's amazing to see him play it down. But the threat of nuclear war has never been higher, ever. We're way, way past the point, even, I think, of the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Well, I don't know. That was a very specific set of circumstances where nukes really did come very close to going off. But we're right there tied with the Cuban Missile Crisis in terms of the level of tension between thermonuclear superpowers. And it is just absolutely the most reckless and criminal behavior of anyone ever. I mean, really, like, the risk that Putin and especially Biden are taking here is equivalent to already like the fulfilled moral crimes of Hitler and Stalin and Mao and Genghis Khan and Tamerlane and the absolute worst mass murderers in all history, right? They are the worst criminals. They have put the entire Northern Hemisphere at risk of being erased off the face of the earth, where Russia, America, and the European Union would lose all of our major cities, just everything. We'd be set back 1,000 years. You'd have 1 billion people starve to death, more. An absolute, just imagine, you like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, Elmer Fudd versus Daffy Duck, like literally Earth pulling a gun to its own head and blowing its fucking brains out. For nothing. For who has sovereignty over Dnipropetrovsk, which my wife is Ukrainian. She can't even pronounce it because she doesn't give a damn about it. And, well, she actually does, beyond reason, but I certainly don't. And no American truly does either. Dnipropetrovsk is a Russian city. So what? You got to move the line around a little bit. This should have been negotiable a long time ago. And by the way, and we skipped this part, I'm sorry, but I did mention America overthrew the government of Ukraine twice in 10 years.
Yes.
I mentioned that in the Canada analogy.
Right.
Bush prevented a Russian-leaning sort of, that's what they say about him, but that's actually a vast oversimplification. Bush prevented a guy named Yanukovych from possibly stealing an election, but more likely they just stole it from him. It was like, like in Afghanistan where it's Abdullah versus Ashraf Ghani, and they're both just trying to steal it from each other. It's not really an election anyway. It's kind of like that. So anyway, they prevented Yanukovych from winning in 2004. And then he's the same guy that Obama overthrew in 2014. And, which led to immediately, it was, first of all, a violent putsch that got the job done in 2014, unlike in 2004, where the other side just gave in. In 2014, it was violence that won the day. And then they immediately went to war. And we know, look, Forbes and USA Today, and I think the Washington Post and the others, they all covered it. As soon as the coup was over, Obama sent John Brennan on April 13th, 14th, 15th, the head of the CIA. And he left on the 14th and the invasion started on the 15th. And the new post-coup d'etat junta launched a war against the people of the east of the country. And this is after the loss of Crimea. If you ever watch TV and they go back to 2014, they always start the story at Russia stole Crimea. Well, why? It was because Obama just overthrown the government in a fascist street putsch. It was really like, and I shouldn't oversimplify. The Americans supported a movement that ultimately resulted in Nazis threatening to murder the president and chasing him out of town with violence, which I don't have any particular reason to believe was like, schemed and operate, what's the verbs I'm looking for here? Run by the CIA in its particulars there, right? It's the overall thing. They were trying to force him to agree to step aside, basically, and give his power away. And then they ultimately compromised on having him agree to early elections. But by then it was too late. They had supported a mob that was led by a bunch of fascists. And I should be specific here, because in America, anybody to the right of Bernie Sanders is called a Nazi or a fascist.
These are real ones.
Yeah. So look, in America, we have Republicans and Democrats. There are very few real communists and real fascists in America.
Right.
Republicans and Democrats call each other that. And as a libertarian, everybody's a commie or a fascist to me, because I'm so anti-government that
you're a bunch of socialists. Yes.
Bullshitists. Yeah. But like in this real scheme of things, we understand how these gradients work. Over there, though, they got a much worse and uglier history, which is the communists versus the Nazis, is their history, and especially in World War II. So, the communists had taken over the country. There's the whole horrible Holodomor, forced famine of the 1930s. I mean, hell, Lenin starved a bunch of people before Stalin ever got there, and Stalin made it much worse. And then, of course, in the World War, when the Nazis came, there were people, especially ethnic Ukrainians in the far west of the country, who welcomed the Nazis to come and liberate them from the communists, which is, I think I even learned this in school as a kid, that like, well, it's at least understandable at first that they might, but then what happened? The first and one of the worst stages of the Holocaust was perpetrated by the Germans with their Ukrainian quislings' help in Ukraine before the death camps were even built. They got there, and I forgot who it was that wrote about this. That like Jews were only like 3% of the population of Germany. But once the Germans got to Poland and got to Ukraine, man, there's Jews everywhere. So they started murdering them all. And their buddies in Ukraine went along with it all. And so this is the kind, and then of course, after the World War II was over, the CIA supported the Nazis, and their underground, Reinhard Gehlen became basically the head of American intelligence in the East under the auspices of the West German intelligence, but under American control and protection. And they backed, right-wing stay-behind groups all across Europe, and including what was left of the Ukrainian insurgent army that had fought in World War II, that continued to fight against the Soviets through 1959. And it took till that long for the Soviets to finish reconquering the whole country after the end of the Second World War, and the Americans were supporting them. So this is, kind of the backstory, who these guys are. If I say, look, there's, I don't know. If I show you a YouTube of like some Klansmen protesting on the courthouse steps in Tennessee, first of all, there's 17 of them, and then and it doesn't matter, right? They have no power. They're not really a danger to anyone. But you look at these guys, you go, wow, there's thousands and thousands of these people. Where are they coming from? And they're coming from, there's like a real infrastructure going back in history. This is their fathers and grandfathers' legacy, was as servants of Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler. And so, especially, when the Soviet Union fell apart, they, a big part of the Nazi kind of diaspora that lived, many of them lived in Canada and the United States, they all went back and set up new education programs, set up political parties and all this. And so all through the 1990s, and then especially after 2004, and then, especially after 2014, these groups were ascendant and determined to rewrite the whole history of Ukraine, where the fascists were always the heroes, or they never really served Hitler at all. They only loved liberty and fought the commies and this kind of stuff. And they've made George Washington out of Stepan Bandera, who served Hitler. And they go, oh, no, he was arrested by Hitler. I was like, yeah, but he still ran his militia from house arrest with full permission from them. You know what I mean? So, and his right-hand man were out there, Melnick and Stetko and all these, Stetsko, and all these guys, they were all still running the thing under his auspices and keeping him updated on everything that was happening the whole time and all that. And it's like, I'm sorry about the Ukrainians. They just don't have a George Washington to make a hero out of. There was this one really cool anarchist guy from before, I forgot his name, who was all right, but I guess he ain't good enough. So they've had to make heroes out of these Nazis, and they try to play down to Western audiences what Nazis they were. But to the Ukrainian Nazis, they're their Nazi heroes. And they're fighting kind of under that spirit, and have been for now 10 years, right? It wasn't just since 22, it was since 14 when this war broke out. And so what happened in 22 was that after, well, I should just say real quick, there was one really bad year of war from the spring of 14 through February of 15. And then you had the Minsk I and Minsk II deals, the second one in February of 15. And that's where they stopped the airstrikes. They pulled back the heaviest artillery and this kind of thing. And they drew a line with a buffer zone, kind of no man's land in the middle, a gray zone, they called it. And that was when the worst of the war became what they call low-level fighting for about 10 years. So you had like 10,000 people killed the first year. And then you had about 4,000 people killed in the 8 years after that. But still, you had a refusal on the part of Kiev and Washington under Obama and under Trump and under Biden to implement that that Minsk II peace deal and bring peace. And it literally came down to the Americans and the Ukrainian side refusing to live up to the deal and demanding that they get to reverse the order. The Russians have to leave first, then we'll do all the things we promised in the deal, which is
right.
Right.
Yeah.
So look, Buck, if you and I go drinking, and I go push a guy up against the wall, and then he knocks my block off, like, you might jump in and help me because you like me, I hope. But also, like, you might even argue with that guy that, like, hey, man, like, you could have got toward the door. Horton had you against the wall, but like not in a corner, right? Like, I would think you got an argument there, right? Like, that's what happened here. Biden finished putting Putin up against the wall. And Putin decided, you know what? I'm going to knock your block off before you get me in a corner instead of after you get me in a corner. Okay? So like in bar fight rules, you shouldn't put a guy's back up against the wall. Forget the corner. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what happened here. Does it justify him pulling out a knife? No. But then again, he's a tough guy, and you shouldn't pick a fight with a guy like that. And especially if you're picking a fight for your friend. Right now, it's you pushing me into him. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes.
What the hell is this, dude?
Right.
It ain't right. And that's American foreign policy sucks, dude. Everybody knows it. Everybody, even I, when I read my own damn book, I find I have this need to try to rationalize this. Like, I can sort of see how they think they mean well and that they think that what they're doing is the right thing. But it's like, what are you going to do, dude? It's Bill Clinton and George Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump and Joe Biden and John McCain. They're the ones calling these shots the whole time. What do you think is going to happen, dude? You wouldn't let these people run your home county.
Right.
You'd run screaming, right?
Yes.
And he's the worst. There's Bill Clinton, the face-biting rapist, you know? Never even mind, like, we don't know exactly what he did to those children on that island, but we know that he beat the crap out of Juanita Broderick and raped her.
Yes.
That's who we're talking about here. You think he's got a wise Middle East policy to go with his wise European policy? To go with his bite the lady on the face as you savagely rape her policy? While he's burning the Branch Davidians, little babies to death?
Mm-hmm.
That's who we're talking about here. It's like, that's who runs America. They're bad people. They do the wrong thing. Even look, Joe Biden is probably the most self-righteous out of all of them. He blows John McCain away probably for like knows he's right about everything.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? He's convinced that he's doing the right thing, but listen to him bloviate. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's Franklin Roosevelt facing down Hitler. I mean, come on, man. As he would put it.
As he would say, right. Yes. Well done. Well done. Why? There's, and I don't want to minimize this or let's say simplify it too much, but these three names, I'd like you to explain why I keep hearing them. Well, in an in-depth, nuanced way. Victoria Nuland, Joe Biden, and Zelensky. All of them have been made to look like heroes. I've been told that Zelensky's a very patriotic, heroic man, but even more so than Trump or maybe Obama, but not quite. But like Victoria Nuland and Joe Biden, what is the obsession with Zelensky, Ukrainian government stuff? Like, why do I keep hearing these three names?
Well, so Biden, first of all, I don't know how young your audience is or how tuned in they've been for how long or what, but Biden was first elected to the Senate in 1972 and was sworn in 73, and which is 3 years before I was born.
Yes.
And in fact, according to Branko Marštík in his book, Yesterday's Man, the first thing he did was denounce Reagan for denounce Nixon for his hasty and precipitous withdrawal from Vietnam. Can you believe it? That's who this guy is, okay? Like, he is the most full of himself, self-righteous guy. And you can watch his speeches. You can read about him in the New York Times and the Washington Post going back this whole time, since the end of the last Cold War, all through the 1990s, all through the W. Bush years, and then when he's vice president, it's Barack Obama. NATO expansion is one of his major projects. He and McCain were like the partners pushing this through the Senate, probably more than anyone else that whole time, right? For generations. So he leaves the Senate to go to the vice presidency, and then Barack Obama absolutely stupidly, insanely gives him the Ukraine brief, you know, as they call it, right? The folder. He's in charge of Ukraine policy, delegated that to him. And so he absolutely just self-righteously, just the same way you can see his speeches going back in the 1990s. He's like, well, look, if we tried to bring the Baltic states in, that would obviously be a bridge too far, right? He says that in like 96, 97. 2004, he's like, even in 98. What do you mean we can't bring the Baltic states in 2 years later? You're crazy. What are you saying? Stalin was right to invade them? Like, wait, what? Like, he's insane, right? 2004, he's leading the parade. We got to bring the Baltic states into NATO, and helped George Bush to do it in 2004. And they brought 9 more countries in 2004. And then on Ukraine specifically, you know, I'm trying to remember if I have quotes of him from the W. Bush years talking about what he thought should be done with Ukraine. I think there's 1 or 2 in there. But anyway, when it comes to Obama, he's essentially in charge. He's on top of the policy there. And Victoria Nuland works for him. Now, Victoria Nuland is the wife of Robert Kagan, who is an extremely important neoconservative intellectual and apparatchik. I'm trying to remember if he ever actually had a government job, maybe in the State Department. He's mostly a writer and a think tanker. He's extremely important and influential. He co-wrote Toward a Neo-Reaganite Foreign Policy with Bill Kristol in 1996 for Foreign Affairs, which was kind of a monumental and extremely important sort of chapter in the neocon saga of their rise to power in the 90s, and then culminating when Bush and Cheney hired them in 2001. And in there, this is where they call for benevolent global hegemony. We're going to rule the world, but it's all for their own good. So it's totally cool, which is exactly what the British said the whole time anyway, but whatever. And his father, Donald Kagan, it was a neoconservative hawk, contemporary with Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz and those guys. His brother, Fred Kagan, was one of the intellectuals who backed the surge in Iraq and in Afghanistan from the American Enterprise Institute. And his wife, Kimberly, is the chair and president, whatever, ruler of the Institute for the Study of War, who you hear cited constantly on the war in Ukraine. That's Kimberly Kagan, runs that. So this is an extremely important neoconservative family here. And Nuland is Robert Kagan's wife. And she worked for, can't remember, I think she came into government during Bill Clinton, and she was an advisor to Strobe Talbott, who was Bill Clinton's NATO expansionist, Russia hand who blew it here, and probably under her influence. Then she was under Dick Cheney. She was foreign policy advisor to Dick Cheney in the vice president's office during W. Bush. And then during Barack Obama, she was made, I think it's Undersecretary of State for European Affairs, which is essentially the ambassador to the EU. Although I think the ambassador to the EU is a separate position, but it's sort of like an equal position to that. But essentially, and anyway, if people are familiar with her at all, if you see her on C-SPAN or on the news or listen to her leaked phone calls, she is a hard-charging lady. She is, like her opposer, she is a go-getter and a get-thing-donezer and a shot caller. She's a real tough guy. And especially if you listen to the leaked phone call of her on the phone with Jeffrey Pyatt. This was recorded in January of 2014, and leaked in February, just before the coup. And she's on the phone with Jeffrey Pyatt, and they're talking about the big three leaders of the protest movement on the Maidan. And that's Klitschko, Yatsenyuk, and Tannibok. Tannibok is a Nazi, a Hitler saluting Nazi from the Social National Party, which was renamed Svoboda, which means truth, but they did not become less Nazi. They just renamed the thing. And then Yatsenyuk is essentially a technocrat apparatchik of the gas princess Yulia Tymoshenko's Fatherland Party. And then Klitschko was a heavyweight boxer and is the current and had his own, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I spaced the name of his party, the Our Ukraine Party, I believe it was, and he ended up becoming the mayor. He's got a prominent brother as well, and he's the mayor of Kiev. Or at least was. I think he still is. So anyway, they're on the phone discussing these, and she's going, look, I don't want Tannibok in there, and I don't want Klitschko. I want Klitschko to teach Tannibok and do a weekly session, this and that. But Yats is the guy, Yatsenyuk. I want him to be the prime minister. And this is the thing. And they're discussing essentially rejecting offers and figuring out how to work this compromise to force the sitting president to allow their people to take over at least as prime minister and the rest of the ministers of his cabinet, and essentially let them run his government and bow down and hold early elections by the end of the year. And so they're pushing for that. And in fact, well, that's how it turned out a month later. In fact, at the time, I think they're just pushing to have him ousted. And they're talking about the form of how they want the new government to look. And it's true that he had made offers by that time about hiring Yatsenyuk as prime minister, but he had not offered a position to Tannenbach anyway. And they had already rejected his offers out of hand. The three big protest leaders had already rejected his offers out of hand. So essentially, anyway, what you're hearing is a transition of power being forced by the Americans, and the whole thing being planned and run by an American, by this lady Newland. And she clearly is the boss of Pyatt, who's saying, yes, ma'am, whatever you say is what we're going to do. And then the whole thing that they say over and over again, we got to glue this thing. We got to midwife it. We got to stick it. We got to make it sail before before Putin can torpedo it, and all of this stuff. And so, and then after the coup, Pyatt said, it's one for the books. And we did it, and it's a big celebration. And then Gideon Rose, who's the editor of Foreign Affairs, went on the Stephen Colbert Report to brag about it and explain it. We're basically succeeding in stealing stealing Ukraine away from Russia. But Stephen Colbert, we got to do it in a real sneaky way, again, before Russia can react. And then they joke about how, well, it's during the Sochi Olympics. Here's Putin put billions into this Olympics to try to impress the West, it's another part of his charm offensive, to try to suck up to Christendom over here, and is, of course, again, being told to go completely to hell. But they joke that, oh, yeah, we just tell them, oh, no, just pay attention to the Olympics. You guys won a lot of gold medals. And Stephen Colbert goes, oh, yeah, look at the shiny medal, while we just steal a whole country away from you. And Gideon Rose says, basically, that's the deal. And then, of course, just like they're both talking about doing it so sneakily and so quickly that it happens, and then it's a fait accompli, and then Putin can't react. Well, but that's stupid, right? And then what happened? Everything went completely to hell since then. It didn't work. This is the famous, by the way, I didn't mention because it's superfluous and not really important. This is the F the EU phone call. Yes. Sorry, I was already cursing on your show. You can bleep me.
No, that's fine. You're good.
But this is the famous F the EU phone call. And what she's saying they're not working hard enough to stick the transition of power here, to force this thing through. And even Barack Obama said this was a transition that we were forcing, that Putin reacted at Crimea because of the transition of power that we had brokered in Kiev, he said. So, and even Carl Gershman, the head of the National Endowment for Democracy, called it a successful, quote, overthrow of the government there. And so, Newland, she also, within a couple of years, she testified, and there's a great quote that I have of her in my book, explain how the U.S. government just basically took over the Ukrainian government. They just put FBI agents in their police agencies and put all kinds of bureaucrats and NGO figures and whoever in their courts and in all their bureaucracies. They just had Americans calling shots for all kinds of government actions, from not just, firing the prosecutor who's looking at Hunter Biden's company, but running all kinds of things, to the point where Putin later, on the eve of war, complains that, look, America has this, he used the word, I guess, the Russian term for colonization. America has colonized Kiev. So what he's saying is, we try letting them be independent, but there's no such thing, apparently, as Ukrainian independence. We let them be independent, and America takes them.
Right. So,
no, I'm taking them then. And even then, he's not saying I'm taking them. He's saying I'm taking the East. And this is another thing, back to Biden's, insane, rambling dementia. I think he's not lying about this. I think he believes it, and he's completely crazy and stupid and senile and wrong. And I don't know if any of his own people will tell him this. I'm sure they're the ones who told him wrong in the first place. No one's contradicting him. There's possibly shades of truth in it, but he's vastly oversimplifying statements out of context. He's not talking about the real context here. He says over and over, he says in his State of the Union, in his debate with Trump, and in plenty of his public statements, I think probably the other night in his thing at the Democratic Convention, I'm sure he probably repeated it, that Biden swears, that Putin swears he's going to take all of Ukraine and then he's coming for the rest of Europe next.
Yes. Yes.
And he really does believe that. This is why he's able to say, look, Hitler took Czechoslovakia, and then the next thing you know, he's going to Poland, and the next thing you know, he's going to France, and then the USSR and everywhere else, right? And the thing is about it is that, well, actually, like, that's not what he said, right? What he said was he's going to move in there and protect the Donbass. He's going to protect the ethnic Russians in the east of the country. And then he goes, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and absorb them into the Russian Federation. And then, of course, Ukraine resisted. And once they resisted, and especially after their very successful, I mean, it was a somewhat minor offensive, but a very successful one in September of 22, when they drove the Russians all the way out of Kharkiv and Oblast and into Luhansk there. He got mad. That was when he called up another 300,000 forces, and that was when he officially annexed not just the Donbass, which is Donetsk and Luhansk in the far east of the country, but also what they call, I don't even know how to pronounce it right, Novorossiya, I guess, which is Zaporozhye and Kherson, which is, the so-called land bridge between the Donbass and Crimea, that the Azov coast there between the Crimean Peninsula and far eastern Ukraine and Russia. And so that whole kind of strip of the south and east of the country is now officially, by Russian law anyway, de jure, if not de facto, Russian control. Because in fact, they do control all of Luhansk, but they do not control all of Donetsk, nor do they control all of Zaporozhye or Kherson. But they de facto claim it. I mean, they de jure claim it, though they do not de facto occupy it.
Right.
And in fact, their failure to take Kiev put them in this real bad spot. This is as far as war goals go, didn't make a lot of sense to do this, right? He put America in the perfect position to deploy this Afghan model against him. Now, when they talked about the Afghan model in the end of 21 and the beginning of 22, everybody assumed that the Russians would smash the Ukrainian military, and then we would be backing an insurgency against them, like in Afghanistan or like in Bosnia, Chechnya, and Syria. We'd be backing, a stay-behind type of operation. Well, but the Russians didn't go that far, and the Ukrainians resisted right away, and their military has not been smashed. So we're not just backing them on the Afghan model, we're backing them on like a Lend-Lease model almost, right? Like a backing Britain against Germany model, but still their nation state, still their military. And by the way, for people not familiar, Ukraine, like Afghanistan, is the size of Texas. And I know that Buck, how big Texas is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anyone who's traveled around Texas or across Texas can tell you, oh, wow, no wonder that this used to be its own nation state then. It's got 5 regions.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. It's not part of the South. People think it's part of the South. It's not. It's west of the South and it's east of the West. It's its own giant region in South Central United States of America here. It's massive. And Ukraine is that big, very close to that size. And so he has started this war. He's left a national government in power in the capital city that happens to have zillion-dollar Western European and American nation states backing it, financing it, and arming it. And so it's, I don't know how it's going to end. I'm sure the Russians are going to keep what they've taken, and they may even take quite a bit more before the whole thing is over, but it will be a Pyrrhic victory at best for them, and at a war waged at enormous cost, and which absolutely could have and should have been avoided by the Russian side. Again, for all of the fault of the Americans here, it ain't quite, man, but it's analogous to W. Bush telling the tanks in Kuwait, go.
Mm-hmm.
When you just didn't have to do that, man. You could have just not said go, and the status quo would have been whatever the hell it was, but it would have been better than this, man. It was a real blunder of his to do this. And of course, it's costing America everything too. And by the way, I don't want to overstate how bad Russia's got it here, because as Biden says, he told Time Magazine, Russia's military's been freaking decimated. That is not true. Russia's military has been built up. They have remilitarized. They had essentially demilitarized since the Soviet Union fell apart and the Red Army fell apart. They had just enough of an army to fight a horrible no-win war for a generation in Chechnya, right? 10, 15 years or something, 10 years fighting in Chechnya, and a hard time of it. They have now decided to build a first world military again. They now have a bigger military than they did at the start of the war. And that's according to the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces in Europe, General Cavoli, American, believe Army, maybe Marine, I think Army General, Christopher Cavoli, says they got a bigger, better military than they had before. More ships, more planes, more men, more artillery tubes, and more shells getting cranked out, and far overmatching American and Western production of artillery shells, which, as we've seen in this war, is what it all comes down to in many cases. And then we're running short on time here, so I should address, too, a huge apparent flaw in my theory, which is that for the last 2 weeks, the Ukrainians have invaded Russia into Kursk, which is site of the biggest tank battle in world history between the Nazis and the Soviets in World War II. And it's been 2 weeks. And who would have thought? And the idea supposedly is to put the Russians on their back foot and force them to negotiate from a position of strength. I think that's a bad bet. I think as impressive as Ukrainian gains are here, and as, possibly like lackluster and embarrassing Russian performance has been in this situation, they're deep into enemy territory and basically surrounded. And the Russians just have more men. And again, more artillery tubes. They've got planes. And they've got these huge warehouses full of old Soviet bombs that now they have new guidance kits that they can hook them to and fire from standoff ranges that are, 500 to 2,000 pound bombs, 3,000 pound bombs that they can rain down. So I think ultimately what we're seeing here, and that, as you said, this video is going to come out in a week or two or something. Yes, so I may be embarrassed to say, but it sure looks to me like a suicide mission, and that maybe it's good for morale back home, but they've peeled important Ukrainian forces away from the front in their own country to launch this seemingly impossible mission. What are they going to do? Hold that territory for the long term inside Russia? And if it came down to it, the Russians would have to pull forces out of Ukraine to finish crushing them inside Russia. And then Putin's going to back down at that point and sign on Ukrainian terms. I don't think so, man. I think he's just going to double, triple down again. He's got millions more fighting age males he can conscript into this thing. And at the end of the day, just has the Ukrainians overmatched, even with Western money and weapons. And so, but, for the martialist out there, you got to kind of hand it to the Ukrainians for their bravery. It's not true that they're all a bunch of fascist Nazis and all of that. We talked about that before. And there absolutely are armed brigades of Nazis inside the Ukrainian military. But it's not the case that that's, what they all are or anything like that. Basically, these are just your average guy who's, from some place who's been conscripted into some army, who ought to be considered, presumed innocent of any other, criminal thing or crazy commie or Nazi ideology or whatever until proven that way. There's regular guys, and they're fighting like hell. And that goes for the conscripts on both sides too. You know what I mean? But it's just an absolute shame that they've been put in this position to do so by these powerful men who, of course, have mostly nothing at stake of their own. And again, I've had to cut this part out of my book. I had a whole chapter on nuclear war that I cut out for the space. Okay. That'll I'm doing like a Tom Woods gimmick where you get it online for free later if you sign up for my email list or whatever, right?
Yes.
But, that's probably like the most important point to emphasize here again is the risk of nuclear war. And I'm not saying that it's like better than 50-50. It's likely it's going to happen, head for the hills or all that. I'm just saying it's much more likely than it was before. And just no people have the right to raise this danger for the rest of humanity. The fact that like the national security posture of all the powers of the earth is that we all hold H-bombs to each other's head in a permanent Mexican standoff and hope that this works. This lasts and nobody ever flinches. Nobody ever misunderstands. Nobody ever makes a mistake. Nobody ever goes crazy. Nobody, makes a really bad series of decisions against each other, leading to catastrophe. That already is bad enough.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got America fighting a war, a proxy war right on, God, I want to say Russia's border. Now, Buck, inside Russia, in Kursk. And they said, I saw the headline, didn't get a chance to read. I saw the Al Jazeera headline, a wave of drone attacks against Moscow today. My God, man, we could be dead before this thing comes out. And over a country that was never in our national interest before. Right. And in fact, even Robert Kagan himself said, geez, Ukraine was always part of the Soviet Union. We never minded then. Who cares? It doesn't mean anything. Robert Kagan said that. Yeah. So there you go. I'm right about everything. That's it. We should not be doing this at all.
Wow. Well, you're such a professional. You've laid this all out beautifully, right in the allotted time. Before we get out of here, and before I let you plug all of what you need to plug, can you give your version of Kamala Harris's analysis of Russia and Ukraine?
It's so funny, man. So for people not familiar, she was on, when I first heard it, I was like, that's fake. You guys are such liars. Give me a break. And then for whatever reason, I was like, oh, it is real, huh? And then I was like, well, obviously she's talking to little children or something though. And you guys are taking this out of context. And nope, she's on the morning AM radio show in Chicago. And she says, Ukraine is a country in Europe and Russia is a bigger country in Europe. And Russia is next door to Ukraine. And Russia invaded Ukraine. And we just think that that's bad. And that goes against everything we stand for. And then, so the thing is, if you listen to it, she's not really calling the men in the room dumb N-words that like she has to dumb this down for them. She does not have that kind of condescending thing in her voice. That's not what it is, dude. What it is that's her briefing. That's what they told her. This is what she understands about the situation. And so this is what she has to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you that I can totally relate because this is me trying to advise Gary Johnson. Okay, wow. Gary Johnson, here's a bunch of things you need to understand about Syria. Syria is a country in the Middle East. Syria is next to a country called Iraq, right? And then I want to blow my brains out because that's not what I told you to say, stupid, right? Same thing here. That's the best she can do, dude. That's what's going on there, right? She was not being insulting to them and calling them stupid. They're looking at her like, dude, what am I, a child? I know where Ukraine is. Tell me what the hell is going on over there. The question was, what's going on? Not, where is Eurasia? You know, like what? You know, what color is it on the map, on your political map? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so they are kind of shocked. If you look at the video, they're like, what the hell? Why aren't you just answering the question? So, man, isn't it something? Isn't it something that you could have the first female president, the first woman president, and she's got at least a firm 50-50 shot at it right now, bud. You could have the first female president, and she's just some total dingbat idiot. It's just some dumb lady. She could be the manager of your grocery store, maybe, you know. Her ambition and intelligence probably fit with that. Not that she'd necessarily be a good manager of a grocery store, but she could probably do that. And that's a good job. I'm not trying to insult grocery store managers, but I'm just saying, like, this lady, the first female president, first woman president of the United States is not like some badass Like Tulsi Gabbard, I disagree with her about a lot of things, but she's a lieutenant colonel in the National Guard and she's been to war and she reads books and she knows all about nuclear weapons and North Korea policy and Iran and all of these things. She's actually really bad on Iran. But you got to respect her because she brings something to this, right? Kamala Harris? Come on, man. Really? This has got to be like a practical joke. And then I'm living in a country where 150 million people can't see what's wrong with this. And I've always said that any right-winger who is a right-winger because they're just so repelled by the left, they couldn't possibly have anything to do with the left, I totally sympathize, and vice versa. So anyone who says they hate Trump, they hate Republicans, they hate born-again Christian morality, being legislated in their public life and whatever thing like outlawing rock and roll or whatever right-wing things they don't like that make them a left-winger, I can relate to that. That's fine. You know what I mean? But do you have to like the left though? Like being on the left against the right, sure. But you have to get on this team. You got to really dumb yourself down so dumb that you're buying this? Really? And then also, too, though, you got to blame Donald Trump because, as Hillary Clinton said, why am I not ahead by 50 points?
Right.
How could he even be theoretically losing to this person? And it's because he's such a jerk. That's what it is. I mean, it'd be better if he was smarter. It'd be better if he read more. It'd be better if he kept better people around him. But what it really is that he's such a jerk to everyone. His first instinct is to bully not horrible people who really need bullying, right? The John McCains and Joe Bidens of the world who need to be brought down a peg and that we love to see that, right? You're the worst Biden's off on some tangent. You're the worst president ever sat in that chair and just and Biden looks at him like, oh my God, I can't believe that this is the level of insult I got to put up with. We like that. And what does he do? He turns around and he does it to Joe Rogan. Because Joe Rogan didn't even endorse Kennedy. He just said, I kind of like Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, yeah, you're a loser. Everyone at UFCU is going to hate you now. And And what is that? It's his instinct. It's the instinct of a fifth grade bully, right? It's the instinct of just a bratty, stupid, stuck-up idiot. And he just can't get over that. And Arthur Bloom, I'm cleaning this up in the paraphrase. Arthur Bloom said he's just the Israel lobby and Buchanan face. That's all he is, man. People want to project all kinds of things onto him. But even Ann Coulter could tell you, he had 4 years. He still didn't build that damn wall. You know what I mean? He's not actually different from them on anything, dude. He bombed Yemen for 4 years. He bombed Afghanistan for 4 years. He bombed Iraq and Syria for a year. He did call off support for the terrorists in Syria. He sent weapons to Ukraine. He didn't implement the Minsk II deal. He didn't work things out with Russia. That was his promise to the American people, and he completely let us down. It's the only reason there's a war going on there now. And it sucks. And it's because he's a complete derelict, right? He's just like Bobby Kennedy Jr. He's just a complete ne'er-do-well. Never sits down, reads anything. He's the kind of guy who listens to Rush Limbaugh and goes, yeah, that's what I think too. Doesn't know anything and not willing to do the work. Doesn't care enough about anyone else but himself to actually know what the hell he's talking about and do the right thing. I mean, look, he had Alexander Vindman on his National Security Council. You got a Ukrainian national on your National Security Council setting your Ukraine policy? You think Trump even knew who are the staff on the NSC down the hall in his own White House for 4 years? I mean, what can he say, dude? He's a total dilettante. He's a lazy bastard. And so this is what you get. All he can do is wing it and try to just bully everyone, but it doesn't work. Bullying Hillary Clinton works because we all hate Hillary Clinton. We want to see you hit the target and her get dunked in the water. But most people don't even know anything about Kamala Harris. You and I might just look at her snidely. I know a few bad things about her, but I couldn't possibly despise her the way I despise Hillary Clinton.
Right.
I couldn't possibly derive the pleasure of seeing him beat her up the way I like, especially because you got the man-woman thing. Usually you don't want to see a man beat up a woman at all. But if it's Hillary Clinton, I don't care. Push her down the damn stairs, right? But, but for Kamala Harris, like, man, you're just going to have something to say on your own. Besides, I'm not supposed to like her for who she is. I'll just have to like listen to her and figure that part out myself. But like, what does he have positive to say about anything? You know what I mean? Even Make America Great Again just rings so hollow. It doesn't mean anything. America first means Israel first. He calls Biden and Harris Palestinians. He says they're too soft on Palestine. What we need to do is give Netanyahu a bigger blank check to kill even more people, to finish the job. What does that mean? To ethnically cleanse the rest of the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? Maybe. What does he care? Miriam Adelson's in charge. Everybody knows that. And who's she? She's the wife, she's the widow of a Jewish casino owner from China. This Chinese money funneled through Likud into this guy. I even had like, it's just a joke, but like I had like this funny theory that like Russiagate, that horrible, evil hoax where they framed him for treason with Russia, was actually a heroic move by the FBI to stop Trump from nuking Iran for Sheldon Adelson, because he's nothing but an Israeli spy and he had made a deal to nuke Iran. And of course, you can't say that. You can't go up against Israel. No. So instead they framed him for treason with Russia to have him in to prevent him from... I just made that up. It's total BS, but it was like trying to rationalize a reason like why they might have done this for any kind of good reason. Well, that would be the most dangerous thing about him. Would be that he would get us into a war with Iran, or that he would let Israel finish the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians out of the rest of the last bit of historic Palestine, which would certainly mean absolute regional war over there, because it would mean that the Israeli right would then blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque and rebuild a temple and all of this, totally start a massive regional war. I can totally see him doing that just for money. Well, Miriam Adelson gave me some money, so I told her she could ethnically cleanse the people.
All right, Scott, I could ask you and get into an entire... I'm more passionate, I suppose, about the Israel stuff even than Ukraine, but we can't. No,
I'm sorry.
I
went off on a tangent there.
No, that's a topic even closer to my own passions. But I'll let you plug away. Website, Libertarian Institute, anything you'd like, and then we'll get you out.
Okay, Libertarian Institute, and please support if anybody has the funds. You know how it is with marginal utility and everything. I know people are having trouble making ends meet, but then again, there are other people who are just filthy rich in Bitcoin and couldn't care less. So if you can afford it, please dig deep and help support. It's me, Sheldon Richmond, James Bovard, Lori Calhoun, Keith Knight, Connor Freeman, Kyle Anzalone, and Joe Solis Mullins, Thomas Edlum, and on and on. I'm sorry for leaving people out, but just go look at the page at Libertarian Institute. We've got a bunch of great podcasts, a bunch of great writers, constantly. It's we're growing all the time and doing great work, publishing books. We've got 14 books out and more coming out all the time. So that's libertarianinstitute.org/donate, and just .org if you want to check us out. And then antiwar.com, scotthorton.org for the show, and youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And then the new book, and behind me you'll see Enough Already is my book on the Middle East.
Yes.
And I'm working on Provoked, so keep your eye out for that. It should be out hopefully by the end of the year, somewhere right around there.
Excellent. Scott, you're the best, man. Thanks for being here on Counterflow.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Bug.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you guys for listening to this one. Scott's the best. He's the best. All I had to do is ask him a couple of questions, and we filled 1 hour and just over 1 hour of content for you guys. As for this show, counterflowpodcast.com. Follow me on Twitter @BuckRebel, BuckRebel. And until next week, y'all have a good one.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.